Everyone always talks about rich habits like there's some secret code. Wake up at 5 a.m., drink lemon water, read 50 books a year, meditate for an hour before you even look at your phone. And honestly, I bought into it for a while. I thought the reason I was struggling with money was because I wasn't disciplined enough, wasn't waking up early enough, wasn't doing the right morning routine. Then I actually started paying attention to what wealthy people do with their money, and I realized something that kind of changed how I think about all of this. The habits everyone talks about, they might be the least important part. Okay, so let me back up and actually explain what got me thinking about this. I've been on this journey of trying to understand money from basically zero, and I mean that pretty literally. No savings, no investments, no financial education growing up. Just me trying to figure out why money always seems to disappear and why the advice I keep hearing doesn't quite fit my situation. So I've been going down rabbit holes, watching videos, reading things, and at some point I started noticing this pattern where wealthy people and the influencers talking about wealth were describing completely different things, like they were speaking two different languages and calling them the same thing. So today I want to think through that. Rich habits versus broke habits, but not the motivational poster version of that conversation, the actual version. Let's start with what gets called rich habits in most content you'll find online. You know the stuff. High achievers wake up early, they exercise daily, they journal, they limit social media, they read constantly, they have vision boards, they say no to distractions. And look, I'm not saying those things are bad. Some of them are genuinely good for your health and focus. But here's where I started getting skeptical. If those are the habits that make people wealthy, then why do I know people who do all of those things and are still completely broke? And why do I know people who sleep in, eat junk food, watch TV all evening, and somehow have a solid financial foundation? Something didn't add up. So I started trying to separate what wealthy people actually do with money versus what influencers say they do. And the difference is kind of wild. Here's the first thing I noticed. People who have real wealth tend to spend less than you'd expect. Not because they're miserable or depriving themselves, but because they genuinely stopped caring about impressing strangers a long time ago. There's this whole culture online right now where success looks like a specific thing. It looks like a certain car, certain clothes, certain apartment aesthetic, and a lot of the content about getting rich is actually about looking rich, which is a completely different thing. The guy posting about his morning routine while sitting in front of his luxury car isn't necessarily teaching you how to build wealth. He might just be teaching you how to perform wealth. What I started realizing is that one of the most consistent things about people who actually have money is that they don't spend it trying to prove they have it. They drive reasonable cars. They live in reasonable places. They're not constantly upgrading their stuff to match some external idea of what success should look like. And that's actually really different from what gets promoted as the rich lifestyle. Think about it from a basic math perspective, because that's kind of how I had to work through this. If you're earning decent money, but you're spending it on a car payment, designer clothes, going out constantly, and keeping up with whatever image you're trying to maintain, then at the end of the month, you have basically nothing left over. You might look successful to someone scrolling past your Instagram, but your actual financial situation is fragile. One unexpected expense and everything starts falling apart. Now contrast that with someone who earns a similar amount, but just keeps their expenses genuinely low. Not dramatic, not like living in the dark, eating only rice, just not buying stuff they don't need to impress people who aren't really paying attention anyway. That gap between what they earn and what they spend, that's where actual wealth starts. That's the thing that can be invested, saved, built on. It's not glamorous, and nobody's making viral content about it, but it's real. And that's something I had to sit with for a minute because I grew up around a version of poverty where the pressure to not look poor is intense. Like you'd rather go without necessities than let people see you struggling. I think a lot of people can relate to that. And so the idea of deliberately choosing to look less successful than you could, voluntarily driving an older car, wearing basic clothes, skipping the trendy restaurant, that felt backwards to me at first. It felt like giving up or settling. But actually it's closer to playing a long game that most people aren't even aware is happening. Here's what I mean. The broke habit, the genuinely financially damaging one, isn't laziness or sleeping in. It's spending money to perform a version of success you haven't actually built yet. It's letting your image cost you your future. And the wealthy habit, the real one, isn't waking up at 5 a.m. It's knowing the difference between buying things and building things. Let me try to apply this to my actual situation, because that's really the point of all of this. I'm starting from pretty close to nothing, so when I hear advice like invest the difference or just live below your means, it can sound kind of hollow, because the difference right now is not exactly impressive. We're talking maybe a small amount per month that I'm working with. And the temptation when you don't have much is to either spend it because what's the point, or to try to look like you're doing better than you are because the embarrassment of struggling is real. But here's the thing I keep coming back to. The habit isn't the amount. The habit is the decision. Whether I'm working with $50 or $500, the underlying choice of am I spending this on something that builds or something that performs is the same choice. It just has different stakes. And if I can get that choice right when the numbers are small, I'm building a pattern that actually matters when the numbers get bigger. There's also something I want to push back on a little here, because I don't think all the influencer advice is useless. Some of the productivity stuff genuinely does help. If you're completely disorganized with your time and energy, it's hard to focus on building anything. Being intentional about your day has real value. But I think the problem is when those surface level habits get presented as the reason people are wealthy, rather than things wealthy people happen to do alongside the actual financial decisions that matter. Because here's what doesn't get talked about nearly enough. The thing that actually separates people who build wealth from people who don't is usually something pretty unsexy. It's understanding the difference between assets and liabilities. An asset is something that grows or generates value over time. A liability is something that costs you money to maintain. Rich people, actual rich people, are consistently trying to own more assets and take on fewer liabilities. Broke habits, again, real ones, tend to involve treating liabilities like assets. Thinking a car is an investment. Thinking expensive clothes are networking tools. Thinking an expensive lifestyle will attract the right opportunities. And I'll be honest, I had some version of that thinking going on in my own head without even realizing it. There was this background idea that if I could just look a certain way or be in certain spaces, opportunities would come to me. And while there's maybe a tiny grain of truth there, like presentation does matter in some contexts, the version of that idea I had was really just expensive and not actually leading anywhere. Here's the realization I kept landing on as I was thinking through all of this. The biggest gap between people who build wealth and people who don't isn't discipline in the morning. It's not the 5 a.m. alarm or the cold shower or the reading habit. Those things might matter on the margin. The biggest gap is what you do with the money that passes through your hands. Do you let it flow out in exchange for status and comfort and short-term validation, or do you redirect some portion of it into things that grow? That's the actual habit. That's the actual difference. And for someone like me, starting from almost nothing, that realization was kind of a relief and kind of confronting at the same time. A relief because it means you don't need to completely transform your personality or your lifestyle overnight. You don't need to become some optimized productivity machine. The core change is simpler than that, even if it's not always easy. Confronting, because it means the thing standing between me and a better financial future isn't circumstance or luck or the right influencer telling me the right thing. It's a series of choices I'm making every day about what I do with whatever small amount I have. So what am I actually going to do with this? Here's my honest answer. I'm going to start paying more attention to where my money goes in terms of whether it's building something or just maintaining an image. Not in a dramatic way, not swearing off all spending that isn't strictly necessary, but just more conscious about the difference. Because I think for a lot of people at my level, the very first step isn't even about investing. It's about stopping the leak. Figuring out where the money is going that's doing the least for you and redirecting even a small portion of it. I'm also going to be a lot more skeptical of financial content that leads with lifestyle, because I've realized that a lot of what gets promoted as the path to wealth is really just content about what wealth looks like from the outside, and those are genuinely different things. The guy who's actually building wealth might be the most boring person to make content about. He's driving his old car to work, putting money into index funds, living in a reasonable place, not posting about any of it. He's not going viral, but he's also not broke. And honestly, that's kind of where I want to end up eventually. not with the flashy version, just with the functional version. Not stressed about money, not performing success, just actually having a foundation under me. That's what I'm working toward. Now here's what I want to explore next, because this video opened up a question I don't fully understand yet. If one of the main rich habits is investing the gap between what you earn and what you spend, then what do you actually invest in when you're starting from basically nothing and the gap is really small? Like, what does building an asset base actually look like at ground zero? Because the advice I keep hearing assumes you have a certain amount to work with already, and I want to dig into what it looks like before you get there. So that's where I'm going next, and I think it's going to be pretty relevant for a lot of people watching this. Stick around, because we're just getting started figuring this out together.